Chamber of Solutions number 5. Good to see so many of you joining us today. I'm Ross McNally. I'm the CEO and the chair of Hampshire Chamber of Commerce. It's nice to see so many businesses from across Hampshire, but indeed from beyond Hampshire as well. We're getting a very good audience build, and thank you so much for regularly attending these sessions. Today we're supported by Mission Performance and Menzies, our partners in the programme, but also by Enterprise M3, who helps us to reach out to the business community and provide support. Today is all about the new normal, and we've been hearing an awful lot of it on the radio, on the news in the past few days, particularly as the government plans have been gradually leaked as to what is likely to be required of us moving forward in terms of workplace distancing and other factors. So I think today we can hear a lot from you and also from the panelists around that topic, but also a general catch up on the kinds of things that are impacting on business and the nature of the business support that's out there. But our new normal is going to be an interesting situation for the next 12 months, maybe 18 months, where distancing plays a key part. Flexibility with the way that we work and the way that our staff works, liability as a business, what does it actually mean for us as leaders of business, consultation, ongoing consultation to ensure that everything is working right and working well and that we are adjusting as we move forward, and even more importantly, new business models and the funding around those models as we adjust to address this new normal and have to make the necessary changes for our business models. And today is about being a community of practice. So this is really about you. You'll hear an awful lot from the panel, but what we want to do is understand through your questions and even through your observations on the chat and exactly the experiences you're having. That's how we all learn from each other. It's a strong community of practice. We share knowledge. It's your program, it's your needs we're addressing, and it's solutions that we're building for you. And finally, of course, we are looking to do these on a weekly basis, every Tuesday at 9:30. So future events are being planned, and we want to hear if you can let us know on the chat as to the kind of events that you want us to manage for you, the themes and the topics. We will make sure that they happen. We are also responding to the changing landscape as dictated by government announcements. But basically, we know the direction of travel for our businesses. We have to be able to work in this new normal. So that's all from me. You'll be hearing probably a few observations from me as we go. But thank you very much for coming today, and back to Rob.
Thank you, Ross. So a bit of more on housekeeping. So let's try and stay muted for the duration of the session. You want to engage the panel, then we encourage you to do so. We'll unmute you to address the panel directly. Videos off. Those that did have them off, I've switched them off just to conserve bandwidth. Again, if you're addressing the panel with a question, then yeah, by all means, switch your video on to do that. The chat and raised hands function. So by now you should all have your chat and participants pop out on your screen. The easiest way of getting in touch, putting a question in, moderated by Bob in the background, is via the chat function. So you can message anyone on this session and message us or everyone with your question, and I'll feed those questions into the right person on the panel. Also, towards the middle and end of the session, you can raise your hand. There's a raised hand. If you want to make a point that we've missed, then please raise your hand. You click on that and your name pops to the top of the participant list. We'll pick you off and then invite you to ask your point direct to the panel. So that's a little bit about the housekeeping, the use of the chat and the participant functions. Let's crack on with a little introduction for your panelists. I am Rob Lewis. I'm one of the co-founding directors of Mission Performance Limited. We're a professional services business that focuses on changing behaviors to improve business performance. We do this globally. We're doing it for 20 years. We're based down in Lyon, the Solent in the Enterprise Zone. And we're working and have been working with the Hampshire Chamber for the best part of 2 years now. I head up the program design for whole company development and based here in Wales for this session. So Neil, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thanks, Rob. And good morning, everyone. My name is Neil Garwood. I'm the Managing Director at Southampton Airport. We're an airport. We connect this part of the country with the UK and Europe, or at least we did until a month or so ago. And at the moment, we only operate a couple of flights a day to the Channel Islands. So very, very hard hit by the current crisis. But thankfully now starting slowly and gradually to look forwards to what the future might look like. It's a very uncertain picture, but certainly a time of change.
Thank you, Neil. And Gary?
Morning, my name's Gary Lee. I'm an insolvency practitioner. I work with Smith & Williamson in the restructuring team in Southampton. I'm also the current chair of R3 for the South and Solent region, South and Thames Valley region, sorry. And R3 is the trade body for insolvency professionals. So we do a lot of interaction with government and looking at changes, and been very interested in a lot of the things that have come out recently.
Thank you, Gary. And Kevin?
Morning, everybody. My name is Kevin White. I run a financial advice and financial education company, Fortem Financial Management. Also vice chairman of Basingstoke Town Football Club. So a lot of my work covers seeing clients out, them coming and seeing me. And then on the sports side, we've obviously got education facilities and having to deal with the challenges that the coronavirus is giving us there. So yes, lots of, hopefully, I've come across a lot of scenarios that can help various businesses. So look forward to speaking to you all.
Thanks, Kevin. And Ian?
Yeah, hi, good morning, everybody. Ian Martin from the Enterprise M3 Growth Hub. Background is I had a 30-year career as an MD across many different functions. I then became a serial entrepreneur myself, and nearly 4 years ago joined the Growth Hub as a growth champion. The M3 Growth Hub works with companies up and down the M3 corridor, and we work in partnership with the Local Enterprise Partnership councils and many organisations, including chambers, providing business support across the region.
Thank you very much, Ian. So this recording will be available on the Hampshire Chamber website, so you can look at it and share it with your team for those that couldn't make it today. Quick format on the session. We'll have a broad perspective from the panel, then we'll open it up. Imagine that we're sitting around a great big board table, answering questions, having quality dialogue. That's how we'd like it to go. So let's start with a introduction, a broader perspective from Neil with his business, which probably more than most has had significant disruption before and during COVID-19. So Neil, it would be great if you could start the session with some of your experiences from your business. So over to you, Neil.
Thanks, Rob. And again, good morning to everyone. Well, you know, I sit here at home with this world map on the wall behind me, and you know, normally the globe is crisscrossed with aeroplanes. They say there's 1 million people in the air at any one time these days. Well, clearly not anymore. So the aviation industry as a whole has been hugely hit by the coronavirus crisis. In fact, transport sectors as a whole have been decimated in the main. There are still some flights flying. You can still fly on emergency basis or lifeline routes only. You can still get across the Atlantic if you really need to, but as a whole, the global aviation sector is down anywhere between 60 and 95%, depending on which part of the world you're looking at. So an industry that's decimated at global level, and really difficult to see in what form things start to return and over what period. And I know that's common with many sectors, where the word uncertainty is probably the most common word we would use right now. Bringing it down a little bit to sort of a more local level, well, the airport itself, and it was 2 months ago today, actually, that Flybe, the largest regional airline in Europe at the time, collapsed out of business. And for many airports and parts of the aviation industry across the UK, an incredibly traumatic period, as you know, many people lost their jobs with the airline going into liquidation, and also connectivity across the UK was hugely impacted, affecting people going on holiday or just travelling for business. So 2 months ago, we were dealing with that crisis at the airport. That was the loss of 80% of the business overnight. and a huge change required for us to even survive at that point. And we saw some early successes and progress as far as backfilling some of those routes and trying to re-provide some of the lost connectivity. But very quickly, we were caught up as most other sectors were at the time, and now everyone is with the growing pandemic of coronavirus. And what we now see, and I just had a stat the other day. So on the 4th of March, we saw 3,215 passengers pass through the airport. Last Friday, it was 27. So the scale of the reduction to go from a business that's seeing, a small town number of people passing through the airport every day to what would effectively be, well, a handful of houses, I suppose, is something that my team and I have had to weigh up exactly how do you come at a problem that's so great when you get hit from two places at once. A couple of words that sort of come into my head straight away as to what we've faced over the last couple of months. First of all, it's been exhausting. Secondly, it's been expensive. The collapse in revenue is almost absolute. We can't bring our costs down quick enough. I imagine many businesses are in the same boat where your revenues are just falling off a cliff and you're scrabbling to try and bring costs down as quick as you possibly can, but it never comes down quick enough. Mm-hmm. So cash becomes the main source of your thoughts. What's that led to for us? Well, it unearths your level of resilience. I think your core level of resilience of your organization, both in terms of your corporate structure and the individuals that you have in your organization. I've seen great examples of people's response in a hugely resilient fashion. I've also seen examples of where we've probably failed people in terms of their ability to build resilience over the years in preparation for something like this happening. What I've also seen is our level of empowerment of our frontline teams. So clearly we've been through a massive restructure with the loss of Flybe, which was only further affected by coronavirus. What we're now trying to do, and through that restructure, is drive empowerment and decision-making down into our frontline. And I'm seeing a huge level of engagement with our frontline people who previously may not have had the capability or the means to make decisions. Well, actually, they're at the front line of our organization. We're better to make some of those key decisions. And thirdly, what these changes have enabled us to do is probably just bring forward some of the changes that we always knew we wanted to make, but never quite had the catalyst to make. So the threats and challenges we faced in the last couple of months have enabled us to unlock some stuff that we thought we probably wanted to do, but never had the means to get to it. Well, now the means have been forced upon us. And actually we've unlocked some things that I think provide some quite innovative approaches to our ways of working that we never really got to before. So overall, very challenging period. I look across the aviation sector and I see huge numbers of issues coming at it from every direction, but I also see a positivity around needing to survive, wanting to survive, and a recognition that industry has been through these problems many times before and always comes back, yes, different, but always comes back in a form that shows the ongoing resilience that certainly the aviation sector, I think, has built up over many years.
Well, Neil, it's a very good insight into your business there, and I've got a number of different questions I'm going to put to you. But before we do that, and questions from our guests, Gary, would you like to give us a little bit of an update on some of the government schemes as of today?
Thanks, Rob. So as we've know, there's been a number of initiatives that have been announced by the government, starting off early on with the furlough scheme, which was live at the beginning of last week. Actually, the week before now. Where's the time going? And people should now be receiving their first payments from HMRC for their furloughed staff. It has been overwhelming, I think, for HMRC. I don't know if anyone's been trying to deal with any other sections, but the messages we're getting back is the staff are just being redirected to deal with this all the time. We've then had the VAT deferral. So for quarters ending March, April and May, there's a deferral of VAT if you need to. Obviously, it would also be something to look at. And if you have the means to pay, perhaps pay rather than deferring it and kicking the can down the road. Alongside furlough, we had the self-employment income support scheme. So looking at those that were registered as self-employed and submitted 2018, 19 and 19, 20 self-assessment tax returns. That's one payment, I think, that's going to be for covering 3 months, and that's due, I think, either the end of May or in June. So a little bit longer for self-employed people to wait, unfortunately. We've then had the Corona Business loan schemes. Obviously, the detail was lacking slightly when they were first introduced. And I think what a lot of people didn't pick up on were the guarantees, and also the fact that it needed to be a business that was going to survive, not one that was already in trouble. And as part of that, you had to put a plan together, submit it to the bank, and then see whether you were successful. Now on that one, there's an 80% government guarantee, up to 250,000. They couldn't ask for a personal guarantee, although they did at the start. And above 250,000, they may ask for a guarantee. Now that can't be specifically on your main residence, but just beware that should you take out such a loan and enter bankruptcy, then obviously your main residence does become part of your bankruptcy estate. So there can be a claim that way. We've now had the bounce back loan, which was a simpler process that was open from yesterday. Loans up to 50,000. Now these are only term loans, which is different to the loan scheme, which had a number of different types of finance. So overdraft, invoice finance, asset finance. The bounce back loans is, as it says, just loans. That one, no guarantees. It's 100% backed by the government. You have to have a business bank account. And if you've already taken out a loan under the other scheme, as long as it's less than 50,000, you can swap. And you can do that up to the 4th of November. And one of the reasons for swapping that is I think that there's a much lower rate of interest on the bounce back scheme than there is on the original loan scheme. We've also had a number of grants from the local council for ratepayers. So if you are a business in the retail, hospitality or leisure sector and you have a property with a rateable value of between 15 and 51,000, then there was a £25,000 grant available there. If you were a small business that was eligible for small business rate relief, then there was a £10,000 one-off payment that actually is quite easy to apply for. I did one at the weekend and it took 5 minutes online with Southampton City Council. So it's very easy. So there's lots of things to look for and to try and help business just survive and keep going. Because obviously the other option is a lot of businesses failing at the moment and people being made redundant, which is something the government is keen to avoid because of the cost to the taxpayer there.
Okay, Gary, that's a very good summary. I'm now going to turn to Kevin. Kevin, anything to add to that from Gary?
No, I mean, I think that's the first phase is making sure that small businesses are being able to utilise the support of the government and what they can tap into. I think the next phase is what do the next 6 to 12 months look like, really, as we become more desensitised to potentially what's happening. And something that's underpinning our business plans really is the word comfort. You know, our business, we've sort of identified is split into 3 sectors. So we've got our clients that come to us, or the people that come into us and into our office, and we need to make sure that they are comfortable. Obviously, we go out and see a lot of clients in their office and in their homes, so making sure that they are comfortable and what that comfort looks like if we go and see them. And then there's the staffing issue with regards to, you know, we are set up for people to work from home. Do we want them to work more from home? Do we have a rota basis? If they're coming into the office, what does that look like? And, you know, we are, rightly or wrongly, we're actually asking our clients what they want, and we're asking our staff what they want. Obviously, working in financial services, quite a lot is prescribed. You know, the levels of service you give clients and things like that is very, very prescribed. Again, rightly or wrongly, we're moving away from that, and we're looking at it while we go through this as more of a bespoke client contact offering, really, because I think that particularly in my business is what's going to drive us forward. And actually, and I'll touch on something Neil said, it's sort of forcing us to make changes we probably knew we had to do. But, you know, if you always do what you've always done, you always get what you always got. And we consider ourselves fairly successful, but we need to change. So we need to move forward and start to implement some of those changes. I think that's the struggle for some businesses now at this moment. Yeah.
Okay, Kevin, we're going to come back and revisit some of those themes. I'm going to Ian to give us a bit of a broad perspective.
Thank you very much, Rob. I think from our perspective at the Growth Hub, firstly, I agree with everything that's been said so far from the previous speakers' own perspectives. I think just really focusing into what we've seen and what we're seeing. Historically, our support to companies across the Enterprise M3 area has been based on growth. But since this coronavirus and lockdown and everything, frankly, we've shifted our focus to look at different phases. Frankly, most of our support at the moment is all about survival, distress coaching, recovery planning, and short, medium, and longer term strategy. And I think, you know, clearly we'll be back to growth at some stage, but right now it's helping companies get through the difficult times that we're going through. Some of the common themes that most of the companies we've spoken to, both new and old, in other words, previous clients and also new ones that are coming to us asking for our advice and support, really the most important one is all about strategy and planning. The companies that will survive and grow quickest are definitely those that are thinking now and planning now for short, medium, and long-term recovery. I think the basic functions that all businesses need to look at in terms of marketing, lead generation, and sales are absolutely key, but also the key aspects of account management, which often gets forgotten. And throughout the whole of that process, a review about how clients communicate with their either existing or prospective customers. And the very fact that we're talking in the way that we are this morning demonstrates just how differently we're all having to think about that. Clearly, funding is an issue. I think Gary's very helpfully explained some, if not all, of the schemes that are out there, which are very good. They all have their complexities. The devil is always in the detail. But I would commend, I think the local councils are working hard, maybe not hard enough, but they're certainly working very hard to try and support businesses as much as they possibly can. And it's a thankless often and a difficult task for them. Two other those that I don't think we should forget about, and one is well-being for all of us. You know, we have those of us who are working from home have no travel time to and from work. We have no time perhaps to unwind when we come back from our stressful day on conference calls or virtual calls or talking to staff who have needs. And I think we need to really, really think about that, not just now, but going forwards as well in the new normal. And last but definitely not least, we're going to have to face some realities, which is that there is going to be, for a period of time, quite a significant problem with unemployment, redundancy, retraining, reskilling, and support for people in every way around that. And although that's kind of outside of our remit as a growth hub, or hasn't been part of our remit, I think it's something that we as support organisations across the area must think very, very long and hard about, because we owe it to our friends, neighbours, colleagues, and former colleagues in some cases to make sure that we're there to give support. I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, thanks, Ian. We've got a couple of questions that have come in from the guests. So one from Polly talking about do we know how local authorities are assigning additional funds for SMEs that have fallen through the gaps? We're on the multiplier for rates relief as the rentable value of our office is 15k and therefore not currently eligible for the 10k grant. The leisure and hospitality wording was different and was up to 15k RV inclusive. Anyone shed any light on that short of going directly back to your local authority? Ross, any thoughts on that one?
We're in exactly the same situation. I know part of this is all about the money, those that are falling through the cracks with regard to the funding, and they have encouraged local authorities to look at those businesses that are in shared accommodation. So those that are in sort of enterprise hubs, etc. And because they were ones where they just were not being recognised as receiving the small business grant. So, but I would say absolutely, Rob, the answer is because there is flexibility and they're being encouraged to be reasonable and recognising that not everybody fits into a particular square hole. And the reason for that is because each business has its own particular circumstance. I'll give you an example, our one. We're in a situation where we don't qualify as a Chamber of Commerce in one of our premises for the small business £10,000 grant. Equally, we're in a business that is not in the hospitality sector, but actually runs events hundreds of times a year. So therefore cannot run events for our membership. And therefore, in effect, we are in the hospitality sector. And so on that basis, quite simply, we are going to communicate with the local authority and see what flexibility there is behind the scheme. And I would suggest everybody does that. We're also in another set of premises where we are, the rates are paid with the rent, and it's a shared enterprise centre. And I know that our landlord is taking that forward and talking to the local authority and seeking a grant for us through those premises. So I would just say, get in touch with your local authority, see what flexibility that they are recommending, because that is exactly the purpose of this funding. They haven't had clear guidance yet as to exactly how to spend this funding, but as it comes down and as they make their decisions. One final point. I don't know what will happen, but an awful lot of funding did go down to the local authorities that has not yet been distributed. And there will be discussions between government and the local authorities as to what happens with that funding as well. It would be too easy to say that it will get out there or it will go back to government. I don't know which. It may not be as simple as that, one or the other. But that will be a subject of negotiation. And as we move forward and businesses go into this new normal, they will have new needs. And I would suggest, and we will be lobbying, that takes on some more flexibility and is not exactly on a case-by-case basis, but again recognises those that are falling between the stools.
Thank you, Ross. So there's a couple of points I'd like to pick up on. But the first one's about empowerment. Neil, you mentioned about empowering your frontline teams. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? And then I'm going to come to Ian and talk about a little bit more about staying close to your clients, stakeholders, and some very practical tips on how you might do that. But first of all, Neil, tell us a little bit more about the how you did that with your people.
Well, look, some of it is driven by necessity, because when we go through changes that certainly my organisation's gone through in recent months, we are forced to think of doing things differently. Now, the changes that we've established at Southampton Airport mean that effectively through restructure, but driven by necessity, but using the current crisis as a catalyst, taking the decision making as far as possible to the front line. There's a great video that I would strongly suggest people watch on YouTube. It's by David Marquette. It's called Greatness, and what David Marquette talks about is creating an environment within which decision making can be made by the people who are closer to the information, not having a top-down traditional structure, but moving decision making and creative thought to the front line of the organization wherever it's possible to do so. So he talks about transferring psychological ownership down to the front line. And it's a great example where, in his case, it's a nuclear submarine, very hierarchical, very linked to the captain making every single decision across the ship, and really creating a group of people who just follow orders left, right, and centre. He describes it as not being one of taking control and creating leaders, but giving control and not taking control and creating followers, but giving control and creating leaders. And in some small way, with the changes we've gone through at the airport, we're trying to instill this culture of decision making on the front line, a nimble approach to problem solving, and a generating resilience through sort of shared approach to problems at the frontline level. It's difficult. It doesn't always go the way that we want it to go, certainly not yet anyway. But empowering our frontline people, for me, drives one of the greatest opportunities to see a new outcome through the crisis that we're all facing.
That's a great insight there. So very practically, is that convening meetings and being very open, authentic with the way that the challenges that you face and getting everyone's input, is that what are the fundamentals of moving to that type of approach?
Yeah. I mean, it's one part of it. Part of it, you obviously need the structure to be in place for this sort of approach to work. But we've removed a large layer of oversight, if you like, which has, as I say, by design, thrust a new layer of the organisation into the limelight, and by giving them the trust, the honesty, and the support. Allowing them to step forward. What I've always seen is that most of the time, the people on the front line of our organizations, the people that are interacting with our customers far more often than I do, they have the answers. They might not always have the conditions or the environment within which to move those answers through to a solution, but they generally have the answer. They're far closer to your customers than I am. And as a result, by trusting their instinct, giving them a supportive framework, creating the environment where our teams can take control, that's been incredibly helpful for us to try and move through a crisis situation. It's very early days, and it needs a bit of design in there to help it work, but a supportive framework that enables decision-making capability as far as it possibly can to flow through the organization to the people with the information. It's been a helpful approach for us.
Neil, does that extend to looking forward to things like social distancing and returning to work and opening up the creativity about how you do that? What sort of progress have you made? Advice would you give to our people on this call about that?
Well, at a practical level, and you take my organisation, I'm not at the airport. I haven't been there for 6 weeks, yet my frontline team are. So I can't possibly be in a position to interpret where we put screens, where we put stickers on the floor. There's no way on earth that I can have that a truly useful engagement with that conversation. But by giving clarity of thought to what our frontline teams are looking to do, provide the framework within which I want them to operate, but trust them to come up with the solutions that are going to, in the example there, Rob, introduce whatever framework of social distancing measures we as an industry establish are best suited for airports. Bearing in mind, and it's an interesting point, an aircraft is a tin tube, anywhere from a couple of meters to 6 meters wide. There is no practical way that distancing can be employed over a long-term basis on any form of transport in reality, unless we have a incredibly seismic change to how we use our our transport infrastructure. And aside, maybe one we'll come back to at some point, I suppose the point is we can implement distancing measures in some scenarios. We can implement distancing measures at certain times. But I think as a whole, for many of our organizations and our industries, implementing a completely new way of managing our people and our processes is almost too difficult to comprehend right now, and will, unless it leads to significant changes in terms of the price we pay or the engagement we have with certain services, will certainly need a huge degree of innovative thought and aligned and coherent thinking.
Great. Well, that's Ross. I know that you've been privy to some of the information from your wider BCC network. I know that you can't break any confidences, but it's some sort of general themes that are coming through based on what Neil's just been talking about.
Well, there are two levels to this, and I think what Neil was saying was superb, and it's really a wonderful opportunity for best practice management and, if you like, authentic leadership at a distance in Neil's case, to really come through to the fore, and I think that's remarkable. But there are two levels at which this operates. One, I think, is the practical matters of what can each individual business do in order to achieve the kind of flexible working, the workplace distancing, the processes and procedures, and the staff interactions in their workplace, which keeps them safe. There is an underlying responsibility for businesses for the health and safety of their employees, but it's a case of that wonderful word, reasonable. You know, that you have a responsibility, and you must take reasonable care to ensure that is delivered. This has got us into a whole new area of activity because we are learning what that reasonable in this new environment actually means. So I think that's the one thing, all of these practical steps, and in a way, businesses have got to take those individual decisions, and they've got to base it on a risk assessment. The risk assessment is their safety net, because fundamentally, if they've undertaken a risk assessment, I believe they can then back that up and say, this has led us to these decisions, working with staff consultation, and then you'll be in a position to actually say, whoever wants to look at it, that you took these reasonable precautions to absolutely make it work. Yes. But there is a fundamental as well, and I don't think this is about businesses, I think this is about government, is government maybe in all of the wording, and we've seen this from some of the leaks and some of the questions around it, the wording is very advisory. And what does it mean when you advise businesses to do things? Obviously, it's advisory as to how to do something, but in the context of what they know are their legal obligations. So it's to go back to your legal obligations, understand what they are, and then use the best possible practice, but not to create a fear of a whole new area of liability for the business. Because if you do that, I think we're going to make, rather at the very time we need businesses to be ambitious, you'll make them risk averse. And so I think it's a point to try to avoid that. So it's a relationship between government and business, and that's why chambers of commerce exist, to ensure that communication. I was, as you say, Rob, I was undertaking doing the consultation response with other colleagues across the network on Sunday for government. So we know what the questions are, what the issues are, and I do feel for government. It's a difficult thing to address, but fundamentally, we don't want to oversteer it so that the businesses feel so fearful of the liabilities that they become very, very risk averse, because that is not going to help the economy.
Yes, well, thanks, Ross. I think that pulling Neil and your comments together, being guided by best practice, but also engaging your wider team in this possible solution by giving them the right information. Ian, I know that you've probably got perspective on this, so please come in.
Yeah, I think, I mean, again, I agree with what both Neil and Ross and others have said completely. I think it's really important as we go through this, not just to look at the sort of business environment about what employers do, but to keep holding the mirror up that says, what does the client want? And rethinking our attitudes to that. I think a lot of businesses could be said to have been quite guilty of thinking about what they want to sell the customer rather than what the client really wants to sell and the level of service that they need. And I'm shifting the emphasis very slightly, but I think it's really important to look and see and think in the new normal about how we pose those questions, both of ourselves, our staff, who, as somebody earlier rightly pointed out, are closest to the delivery very often in terms of talking with and meeting customers, but making sure that the services in the new normal better reflect what clients really, really want, rather than maybe what we've always given them or think they want. And in this particular climate where the opportunities for delivering, service to the client and that whole level of how service is measured just really needs to be rethought in a digital world. What is going to make customers come to us, keep coming back to us? And I think this is really important, and there's never been a better time to rethink that through. So forgive me shifting the emphasis very slightly. I think it's absolutely right. But then again, or there again, creativity and innovation are going to be and are already proving to be key in the way that companies that are going to succeed post-lockdown and into the future look at their services, their products, and ultimately the processes by which they are delivered. And that can be an incredibly liberating thing, not just for the companies themselves, but very often for customers who are delighting in new ways that 10 years, 5 years ago, 3 years ago, even 1 year ago, we perhaps wouldn't have been prepared as consumers to accept the service. So I hope you'll forgive me for shifting the emphasis a little, but I do think it's very important that we as a group of people look at the different angles of this, and I hope that that's answered the question you were putting to me. I'm not sure if it has.
Well, thanks, Ian. That's good insight. I want to bring in Rob Mee. I don't think is that your surname, Rob, or your full name? I don't know, but Rob, please address. You've got a unique perspective on this. The floor's yours.
Okay. Sorry to break you off there. So, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead, Rob.
Right. So, I'm a program manager. I've worked for lots of different government and organisations. The particular thing that I was thinking about was what Neil was saying, which I found very interesting. So, I've worked at CCAM, the ambulance service, for 6 months or so, some couple of years ago. And the interesting thing was that they did the transition from what we call command and control into a leadership at all levels. Now, that was very much what Neil was getting at, I felt. And obviously in a collaborative way of working, we all need to get to that. We need to try and work out what that means. I think the benefit here in terms of how do we, and Neil, your thinking was I was sort of phrasing it in my head that was the way to go, was how do we get people to operate with good leadership in their minds, good management processes, when frankly we haven't had a chance to tell everybody, brief everybody, and make that the new norm. Get to the real point. I think we need to draw a line, whatever that line is, which says, okay, we can't get everybody to be social distancing on buses and planes and all that sort of stuff, as you said. What can we do? What level standard we need to get to together? I mean that this sort of forum, so that we can then put those processes in place, brief the people quickly. The problem in all this, which I think Neil alluded to, is that if you try to move everybody at once and put the processes in place, just not solid enough for when you actually kick it off. So I think there needs to be, my view would be, a briefing paper of some description, which describes what the challenges are, what we can and what we can't do, and how we get there effectively without upsetting the public.
Okay, thank you for that, Rob. A good insight building on what Neil was talking about. I'd like to sort of come straight back to some questions, specific questions that were asked pre-registration on the registration. If you want to put those directly on your chat function, then please do so. I'm going to pick up on some. I have a list here condensed in front of me. We've talked a little bit about social distancing and empowering frontline teams to work out the solutions for that particular challenge. But what about Anyone got any thoughts on approaches to a phased return to work and some of the anxiety that people might feel and how you handle that about traveling to places like London, where the advice is sort of grey at best? So phased return to work, dealing with anxiety, moving, commuting to places like London. Anyone like to pick that one up?
There was one point, Rob, for me, and it may sound strange coming from the guy that works in the travel industry, but with reference to travel to places like London, I mean, I would, and I don't know what sector the question originates from, but I mean, and when I saw the question, I thought hard. Of all the journeys I took in the previous year, every meeting I went to, every time I went to London, to Southampton, to Portsmouth, to Glasgow, wherever, how many of them did I actually need to make? How many times did I actually need to leave my house, or technically, I mean, certainly the airport? Could I have made that call? And I mean, like what we're doing now, could I have done it on a remote basis? Did I need to actually be there? So, I mean, that would be my first question. I think we're probably all asking ourselves those sorts of things. I do think there is a future for travel. I do think people will return to some sort of a semblance of the joy of traveling, certainly, but also the requirement for travel. But I think people will question before they make any journey whether they really need to do it. Now, this may taper over time. We may get back to just doing what we always did in the years ahead. But I think certainly in the short term, people will question every requirement to go on any sort of distance-based travel. And I think maybe for cases like living where we do, close to London, that will be as prevalent as anywhere else.
What about for those journeys that are deemed to be so essential they can't deliver it virtually, and they've got to go to London or another place?
Yeah, quite. Yeah, it's a different part to the question, and I think it's incredibly valid. If you have to make these journeys, then getting yourself mentally in the frame of mind where you're comfortable to do that is a real question. I suppose my point is if you don't have to essentially make the journey, then question the relative value of it.
To bring that back to you, Ross, the point about you can't force anyone to go to a particular meeting, but what you can do, falling back on your earlier point about providing a duty of care to your employees and doing everything that you can to possibly ensure their safety, is it's a bit more grey in that. But the guiding principle is work to best practice. The TUC were talking about it, weren't they, the last couple of days, about operating at that level of providing the most effective, safe environment for where employees are safe to execute their duties. So it's more of a two-way dialogue guided by those TUC guidelines, I would think.
I totally agree with you, Rob, and with the TUC on that matter. I think staff consultation, and it is interesting because in all of the reporting, I think the whole issue of staff consultation was not promoted strongly enough. It's clear that staff consultation is the key to an awful lot of this, and all of the new ways of working and the risks that we are sharing with our staff in this whole venture is in part remedied through effective staff consultation. But that linked to flexibility as well. One of the underlying aspects will be there will be vulnerable people that are working within all of our environments. And there will be a need to change people's work very often, such that they can work from home. And if what they're doing can't be worked from home, then we should find roles and tasks that they can do and work from home, and others can take on those tasks and roles that need to be in attendance somewhere.
Yes.
And it's really just about that total communication and total flexibility and trust and engagement with the whole team to remedy and get that into a position where the business is working. And there will be issues around furloughing and sharing out of that furloughing and all kinds of things that are going to come into play. And that you can't beat, quite simply, engaging with your staff around that subject. We're all sharing the same goal. In terms of travel and the need to actually go to meetings, I concur with Neil. I think absolutely. This is a great opportunity to recognise, and carbon footprint and other matters coming into play, exactly how important, how significant it is to travel to these meetings. But I think public transport is going to have a major battle on its hands to try and make it an effective service. and there will have to be therefore an engagement with their travellers with regard to effective protective PPE, etc., such that they're in a position to be able to travel effectively. That we're in the foothills of that conversation, I suspect, and it will be interesting to see how that unravels.
So presumably, Ian, in talking about future strategy and planning, the way that the business operates, home-based, on the road, office-based, all of that's up for discussion.
I think it is, but I think we already, most of us, can guess reasonably accurately that there are going to be some sea changes in behaviour, at least for some time to come. I mean, frankly, until a vaccine is in plentiful supply and proven to work, there will be some form of social distancing in place for a long time. Hopefully, not that long, but it really depends on how quickly that can be found and made available. But even then, it will be a phased thing. I mean, human behaviour means that there are certain activities, and we have to accept there's going to be some winners and losers in this. And I also think we have to be honest about managing expectations of some sectors of the community more than others. I'm not dictating what they are, but I think we have to have an honest debate about understanding which ones are more difficult. I mean, human behavior is likely to make some activities like possibly events or catering or hospitality less appealing in the short term until we can find proven, tried and trusted ways of overcoming that. Yeah. But I think there is even now quite a lot of planning, simple planning that companies should have already done or can be doing to think about ways in which they can offer some or all or different services in a way that can meet some of the likely strict distancing measures. I mean, there are going to be, I think, each sector is likely to have some form of basic risk assessment. I have no pre-knowledge of this, but probably categorizing low, medium and high risk in terms of social distancing or social access. And I think each industry then needs to be provided with support and help from the likes of ourselves, chambers and so on, to identify the best ways to develop some common practices to do that. Yeah. It's not going to be easy. It's not going to be easy, but I think with a will, it's perfectly possible.
Okay, thank you for that, Ian. Before I bring Wendy in, then followed by Polly, I've got two questions for us. I think that some of the work that we've been doing over the last 4 or 5 years with Stephen Bungay, who's part of the Marquet School of Distributed Leadership, Neil, you may well have heard of him, got an excellent book called The Art of Action. And a lady called Rebecca Hontz, her particular approach talks about understanding what beliefs and assumptions you hold to be true in the next 18 months. And then working back from those beliefs and assumptions to plan out what your strategy might be. So with that in mind, Wendy, would you like to ask your question direct to the panel, please?
Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, loud and clear, Wendy, go ahead.
Hello. This is my first forum like this, so it's been really useful. So thank you, first of all. I set up my business a few months ago, just before Christmas, in leadership training, having left the Navy. And I'm at a point now where I'm thinking, well, it's possibly a really good opportunity for me to be able to go in and support businesses in how they can manage their teams and come up with this strategy that keeps being mentioned to come out of this in a more positive way. My big challenge, though, is finding those companies that are willing to pay for it, because obviously they're furloughing people, they're struggling financially, and it can be quite difficult to explain to them actually the cost benefits of what I can provide. But short of me going in and offering free services that unfortunately doesn't pay my mortgage, has anybody got any advice on what I could do to kind of come in with that? And do you think that it's the right time for me to be offering these services?
So can I put that to you, Kevin, and then open it up?
Well, I think absolutely it's the right time to be offering those services. I think anything leadership training or change management is, I don't think there's probably been a better time to do it. But quite rightly, what you've said is with some businesses potentially struggling, how do they pay it? I think that a good idea, and obviously I don't know if it's in your cost structure at the moment, is a little and often approach. So potentially a monthly subscription where businesses can subscribe to some kind of leadership program, which takes them through different phases. Obviously, you'll know a lot better than myself, but that might encompass not only personal leadership training, but also the empowering others and staff members, and focusing on any staff members that haven't been furloughed or made redundant, because you, as any business, you're only as good as the people who work for you. Okay, so you may have had to shrink your workforce, but getting over that concept that now's the time to invest in them isn't a cost, then it's an investment in the business. So I think it would potentially be tough to approach people with a large charge at the moment, just because everyone's price sensitive. But having something little and often, a monthly subscription, something like that. And remember, you know, resistance is created through a lack of clarity. So as long as people are clear on what they can get and how it can benefit them, if it's priced right, I think that's probably the way to go.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. Wendy, from something from me before I bring in Polly and then Matt. One thing that we've done obviously is reduce our rates to reflect the times that we're in, but also for new clients, it's paying them. We still send out a credit note so they know the value of the services that you're providing. It's a nice way of looking at it. So you're not giving it for free, you're just providing a credit note. If you are delivering X amount of sessions and support over a wide period, then it's a credit note and you discount some rates. But it's probably the subject for a wider conversation about engaging with clients, perhaps something that Ian can pick up a bit later on, but very specifically working with them, perhaps looking at rates and looking at credit notes so that your services aren't undervalued or undervaluing yourself. And from a personal perspective, being ex Royal Marines a few years ago, you know, taking those specific skills that you got from the Navy, especially in the situation that we're in now, would probably be invaluable. But it's presenting those in the right way against the right financial model. But please send us some questions and link up with me post if you wanted to explore that a little bit further.
I just add one point on that, Rob, and
yes,
Wendy,
yeah,
just in answer to your question, I think, and Kevin's put it well already, when businesses are in crisis, it's a bad time, but sometimes coming out of the crisis can be even worse.
Yeah.
The costs are going up, your revenues maybe not coming back yet, and it's in those periods that you need the resilience and the change management to continue to grow into what you hope is going to be a return to something that you saw before. So I agree. I think now's a perfect time, maybe not this minute, but within the coming weeks as people are starting to get some sort of growth back. And for me, the two themes are resilience and change management, as Kevin's picked up, and resilience, emotional resilience, psychological resilience. How do firms and their employees build the resilience now? Because we know what the world is like. This crisis has been a huge example of how difficult it can be. I think people have learned, build the resilience now so that when the next crisis comes, it will come at some point in the future, firms and their employees are better ready to deal with it, both at a corporate level and an emotional, psychological level.
Yeah. Thank you, Neil. Thank you for that insight. I wanted to bring Polly in. Polly, are you ready to address the panel? Thank you, Wendy.
Yeah.
Thank you.
The floor is yours, Polly.
Oh, right. I should probably start my video. Yeah, it wasn't really a question, more than just an observation that as we move into trying to find what the new normal is, I believe that the government are going to sort of begin the narrative as well of moving towards net zero carbon. And I think when we were talking about travel before, and was that meeting really worth it? Could I have done that remotely? Now, some of the quite traditional cultures of business have been forced to change. I think we need to play on that propensity for change. And reintroduce that it's actually okay not just to sometimes work remote or cut the commute, but to really consider our travel as part of our personal and company-wide obligation towards meeting the net zero carbon targets. And I was at the National Consumer Federation conference for net zero carbon in the home earlier in the year, and this conversation personal travel is being discussed as part of this conversation, BSI, BEIS, National Energy Action, Citizens Advice, Trading Standards, Energy Savings Trust. They were all part of that conversation. So I believe it's possibly on the back burner at the moment, but it will come through. And as a business, I think actually, Wendy, even though money is tight and we're a micro business, I think that business owners, and maybe the smaller business owners, are really looking at what the future looks like, and bloody hell, now is the time for us to make change and make really big change. So we're working towards looking at B Corp status with NLH Environmental, and she is putting together packages of work that people can start with. It's almost like pre-course work, and I think that's a really nice way that we've advised her to get interest in from people. So this is the work that you can do now. So when we do meet, when you can put it in your budget to work on your leadership, you've done as much of your pre-course work as possible, and then we can sort of, for want of a better phrase, hit the ground running. Yeah. So I think you can actually start warming up your audience, Wendy, like we are with NLH Environmental, to sort of get that party of interested people engaging with you now, whether they part with money or not. So yeah, that was kind of two things.
That's very good, Polly. I particularly like your reference to the B Corporation and net carbon. Can you tell us a little bit more about the B Corporation?
Well, B Corp is kind of a slightly softer approach than ISO, and we're just starting our journey with this, so I'm not an expert, but it's companies like Ben & Jerry's a B Corp, right? So it's about showing the world that you're putting your energy into becoming more socially, environmentally aware. And if you look at the B Corp website, it's actually brilliant and will provide lots of information. And it's something that you can work towards. So the beginning point of that for any business would be to have kind of an environmental audit, which we went through just before lockdown. It cost us about £1,000. And we've now got a checklist of what we need to do to work towards our B Corp accreditation. And I do think, because people will have been impressed by some people have responded to the crisis, and how some people will have their list of people they will never ever do business with again because of how they've responded to the crisis. I think as business owners, as decision makers, psychographics and common values are going to become part of our buying decisions in the future. And that's why I think it's really important to sort of put your hat in the ring when it comes to making these types of considerations.
Well, that's a really good point, and it links to a question that was asked on registration about getting your personality, expertise, and empathy across. That, being judged by the company that you keep, being part of B Corporation would signify that you are one of those types of organisations.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously if you've been in business 10 years, 20 years, you build up a reputation anyway, right? So we're known for being transparent and trustworthy and helpful. But I think that stamp of approval from B Corp, which is a globally recognised accreditation, I think would go a long way. We're moving into a net zero carbon future, right? Yeah. So I think it's going to become a mega consideration, and people need to have these environmental statements on their websites and in their proposals, and it needs to start being considered. And we're adding something to our proposals about how we'll hold meetings in the future. So we're putting our foot down and going, I'm not driving to Solihull from Odium for a 2-hour meeting. Never going to happen ever again.
Yeah.
So I think people are resetting their own boundaries in business, and I think wrapping that up with a nice accreditation like B Corp.
That's been very insightful, Polly. Can you put a link to that on the chat function?
I think I've just seen that Ross has done it for me.
Yeah,
Ross has put bcorp.net. But NLH Environmental is just going through a rebrand. She's a Hampshire-based business. She's down in the New Forest. She's done our audit for us, but she is putting together these packages of almost pre-coursework. So any business that's interested in going down the ISO route or the B Corp route should be able to contact her in the next sort of month or so and work out what their homework could be while they're working from home.
That's brilliant. Could you put her details on the site too?
Yes, will do.
That's great. Thank you very much, Polly. I'm going to bring Matthew in now, and then Ian, we're going to talk a little bit more about the leadership point. So Matthew, floor is yours.
Hello, Rob. Thank you. Hello. Just wanted to speak very briefly to something that's come up repeatedly today, particularly from Neil at Southampton Airport, talking about the event horizon and travel. Our business was very traditionally based. We're a knowledge exchange business of drawing. About 70% of our business was event based. Where we would literally draw either digitally or on paper at events, and this is in Europe, globally, and in the UK. We've seen that flip entirely to digital within the last 3 months. Although we already had a digital service, it was very much reduced. As I think Neil and others have said, it is possible to work digitally in these ways. What you must do is what the Chamber of Commerce have been showing a fine example of, learning as they go and trying. There is experience out there, you can find it. We used to work to a 6-month window of work booking and things like that. At the moment, we're working week to week. This is disruption in its practical effects. And I'd just like to finish very briefly by saying that what Polly said about B Corp and using, frankly, wisely green politics, for want of a better phrase, about efficiency and saving travel and saving risk for people is a very powerful line and should be applauded if you can possibly do it.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Matthew. Ian, did you want to come in?
Just very briefly, I did want to come back just very briefly on the question that Wendy Hems was asking about. And in essence, I think your fundamental question is linked to how can I market myself better to get more customers at the start of your launch of your business. And I think it's just worth taking a step back and just asking the question, what is marketing? And fundamentally, very simply, it's all about defining your products, your pricing, your services, your positioning. And whilst you're out there focusing on the management leadership side of the training that you're approaching this from, I think you have to just remember that at this particular moment, there are two aspects of training. I'm sure most people will agree with me. One is product training, what you need to do in order to do your job. And the second is management leadership and skills training for life. And in a sense, what we're all having to do is to retrain the skills bit, the product training, because everything we've ever learned in the past has kind of shifted. Not completely, but it's shifted. And we're having to retrain, most of us, not just now, but in the next few months, we're going to have to retrain to focus on making sure that we can all deliver the product and service. And in fact, that we've defined the product and the service afresh. And all I'd say to you, Wendy, is I think that's a really important thing. There's a great time. There's no better time to be talking to prospective customers. Is that what you really want? Because there's no question that in addition to the product training, there will be a requirement for management and leadership training very closely following on behind that. And I think if I were you, I'd be using your service to ask prospective and existing clients what they really want, adapting your product offering in the short term to provide more of what they want, some of it tasters for free, but secondly, to lead that into the specific strength of your training and management and leadership training going down the line. I just wanted to make that point because fundamentally, it's all about marketing, and we have to come back to that and think about new ways of doing it.
Thank you, Ian. Thank you for that. Ross, I know that you wanted to respond to a question that came in just a second ago about from Astrid.
Indeed. The question is around setting up a tutoring business on a one-to-one basis, working alongside schools, and with schools being closed now, what's the access to market, and how can she make this work, bearing in mind this was set up in December 2019? Well, the first thing is to get in touch with us, to be perfectly honest, because we can provide services to ensure that you get the kind of support and one-to-one mentoring and coaching to take your business forward. That's through partnerships across the whole of the county. But also there are organisations that are obviously can access schools for you, whether that's EBP South, and maybe just adjusting the offer in a way that is meeting the needs presently. I know somebody very close to me, happens to be my daughter, that does tutoring for undergraduates and has done an awful lot of this over the past couple of months. So if you're maybe going into partnership with other organisations that have access to market, might be a way of going. But there's no easy answer for any business that has started up in December 2019 and is trying to get traction now, because suddenly the whole of the model that you're working to has been changed. And so I think it needs careful consideration and a lot of thought around whether there are new opportunities just slightly sideways of your main aim. But there are certainly a lot of organisations that we work with that can help you to get into this marketplace effectively. So get in touch.
So thank you, Ross. I'm going to go back to the registration questions now. We've worked through quite a few of them. If there's still ones that we haven't, then please put them on the chat function. I'm picking up on one around how we deliver great levels of service transactions when it's technology dominant. Now, Matthew that came in and talked about a question earlier, and any member of the panel, what are your thoughts on how we build that level of service when you can't necessarily see the client day to day? Any views on that? How we're doing it with our existing businesses?
I think this is really difficult. If you look at the hospitality industry as a whole, it's built on service. Take Wagamama as an example. The concept is communal tables. Bringing people together in a setting. The majority of food and drink environments are similar. I think we may not have the answers for some of this yet. We may have to engage in innovative thought and creativity. The answers will come, and those with the solutions in this space will be the ones that thrive. I genuinely think there are some concerns in some sectors because the very concept of how they operate is based on us being humans and being close to each other and engaging with each other. But I do believe that there will be solutions within every sector for just adapting to operate in a new way. I can't see what they all are right now. I don't know if any of us can, but yeah. There will be creative solutions out there.
Thank you, Matthew. Anything to add on that?
Yes, very briefly. Very often the simplest solutions are the best, and I think Neil spoke to that very powerfully about enabling power low down. We're a micro organisation like many, and there are an extended network of less than 10 of us scattered all around the UK. We very rarely meet. We use co-working spaces when we do meet in Birmingham or Southampton, but we always check in every day. That basic etiquette of a 5-minute is absolutely key if you're going to be working in a dispersed form, and that it places enormous strain on any leaders. And that speaks to a note I've made here in one of the drawings for today: mental health. It's time to retrain. That's key to the flexibility and the resilience which have come up repeatedly today. That's it.
Okay, thanks, Matthew. I want to bring Gary and Kevin in now, because part of this reorientation to the new normal is going to have some sort of financial implications as you invest in new ways of doing it, especially perhaps around technology. So from Gary and Kevin's perspective, anything that you can add in terms of funding and insights about how companies might tap into the resources they need to pivot onto a new model? Gary first.
Well, I think one of the things you've got to be certain of is it's planning. We all know that we're going to have to change, and it's really sitting down and thinking about what that means. we've, many businesses, including the business that I'm in, have had to react very quickly to having a workforce around the country of nearly 2,000 people working from home, which had issues at first, which meant identifying things like increasing our bandwidth so that we could all work remotely, which has worked very well. It's bringing in new technologies such as Zoom or Microsoft Teams, and looking back and seeing how you think they're going to work best, both not only in your business, but also the businesses that you're interacting with. Now, all these things have a cost. And so it's planning and budgeting from my point of view. Many businesses that I see fail is because they haven't budgeted properly, or something's come up that's hit their plans, and they've not been able to follow through what they had, and there was no plan B.
Yes.
It's also talking to experts. There's lots of knowledge out there. There are very few things nowadays, I would say, that you actually would be the first person to try it. So it's trying to garner the knowledge, and it's talking to the experts. So going to financial advisors, looking at what product may be best for your business. There may be something that you see, but if you actually talk to a financial advisor, they will actually come up with a better product that will, in the long run, probably cost your business less. Okay. And that's, money is going to continue to be king for a very long time. Cash is king, and it needs to be looked after. And businesses, one of the main problems they're going to have as we come out of this is whether they do have the capital to actually expand their operations. And I think it's not being overly optimistic and realizing that it's possibly in most businesses going to be a fairly slow process to get going again, and just making sure that you've got the capital to fund that.
Okay, thank you, Gary. Kevin, anything to add on that?
Yeah, I mean, I'd absolutely agree with what Gary said. I think one of the exercises we've done quite early on is look at where we're spending money and what outgoings might be replaced with the new technology that we're doing. So, for example, I've been speaking to a lot of my clients on Zoom. That wasn't an expense I had 8 weeks ago. However, an expense I did have 8 weeks ago to see those same clients was the petrol that it would cost me to go and drive to their house.
Sure.
And I know that sounds really, really simple, but that the petrol side more than offsets the Zoom cost. Things like, and I said, we've done a client survey off the back of some of these findings to make sure we're getting feedback from them to say that they're happy with it. But even posting, in financial services, like a lot of industries, there's a lot of regulation. So there's a lot of paperwork that needs to be sent out. And typically, we've always sent it out by post, like a lot of pension companies do. And if people look at my post that I send, like they do many of their pension posts, it might not even get opened. So actually, we're now going to a more structured email of sending the paperwork that way, which can then just be drag and dropped into a Kevin folder, for want of a better word, than put in the financial box that everybody seems to have. So we're adapting our business a lot like that. And it goes back to asking the important people to your business, the clients, the staff, how does it look like from their perspective? Even down to the staffing. When we're allowed to have staff back in our office, we've done a RAG analysis, so a red, amber, green analysis on what tasks actually need a physical person in office to do. And surprisingly unsurprising, there's very little in my business that needs to be done by a physical person because we've got online files and all that sort of stuff. So actually, when we allow staff to come back in and we are allowed to do so, I'm more concerned about the social aspect of it as opposed to the actual tasks that need to be done in the office. I'm more than happy for our staff to work from home. Things like the post needs to be done really. But with social distancing, I'd rather have two of my administrators or technical guys in the office where they can have human conversation and human interaction in a controlled environment than them sat at home like many of us are now. So going back to the financial side of things, look at your own business at what can be stripped back and the budget reallocated, because as simple as that is, it's been a real eye-opener for me.
Okay, thank you, Kevin. I know, Ian, you've got a perspective on this.
Yeah, just a very brief point. I completely agree with what both Kevin and Gary have said. I think one of the things which may sound a bit odd, but I focus on and we focus on as the Growth Hub is making sure that companies have put in place strong enough business foundations on which they can scale their business and grow. Now, in the moment, it's survival, but one of the key parts to that is, as Kevin just said, and Gary, it's all about the planning and budgeting and having the right financial support or accountant in place. And I'm afraid to say an awful lot of companies don't have that. There are some extremely good accountants, many of you probably on the line, out there, but there are some that don't do what companies need. And as Gary said, cash is king. Better financial management, helping them to plan their cash flow, build up reserves so that in times of crisis like this, you have got something to fall back on, minimizing your overheads, all the basics that companies used to do. And coming to the second thing about the planning, if people want to raise capital, you have to have an investor deck, a business plan, a strategy to show to any form of lender, be it friends, family, or debt or equity lenders, or even for the government grants like CBILS. You have to have that plan there. And it's really, really important that people realize that and seek help and support to put that in place, and we can help with that. There's a lot of people on this call who I'm sure can help with that too. It's not just accounting, it's things like IT basics, health and safety, legal, HR, to make sure you're doing all the right things. These have been overlooked by many early stage startup businesses scaling up, and I cannot stress that the ones who got those things in place, who thought about them and are working with good enough partners, are the most likely to succeed in the new normal.
Thank you, Ian. I think there's a question that came in from Graham which supports that, looking at a wider perspective of funding sources and looking at perhaps equity and perhaps giving up some parts of the equity of your business is another way to fund that. Doesn't necessarily have to always be through the traditional methods of raising funds. I've just got one eye on the time. It's 10:55. Some great questions coming in, some great suggestions here from Polly talking about Monday.com. Lots of very whizzy but very cheap ways of pivoting onto a technological platform. Perhaps that might be the subject of another session. But with one eye on the time, and Ross, I'd just like you to close the session, if you would.
Thank you very much, Rob. Firstly, thank you so much to Kevin, Ian, Neil and Gary for your brilliant insights and brilliant input, and also to everyone that's here today and the wonderful questions that we had, not only in advance of the meeting, but also during on the chat as we proceeded. I think these sessions are proving their worth in that this is providing, as I said in my opening remarks, a really wonderful community that's coming together in order to help each other during what are unprecedentedly difficult times. And I just hope that when this phase is through, and I mean in 12 months or 18 months or time, that this community can carry on working together. The Chamber is going to ensure that the opportunity to do so is there. And it's really almost to answer one of the questions that we received in advance of the session around how do we build a good business hub in support of all of the businesses in our community. And this is part of it. What you're seeing here today is part of that, but it's building partnerships with the LEPs, it's building partnerships through BCC, lobbying up into government. It's ensuring that the Chamber of Solutions goes beyond these events, but actually introduces such things as we are producing peer networking and one-to-one advice and panels providing solutions and answers to specific queries. So we're here as a business support service. The Chamber of Commerce has had to address its underlying approach and find new ways in order to operate. So we understand what each of you as a business is going through, and we want to be able to learn from you and support you in the coming months. So please do stay close to your Chamber of Commerce, stay close to each other and help each other through these very difficult times. We have a session set up for next week. Rob will tell you a little bit about that, but we are intending that these should be weekly sessions and continue as we need to in order to provide support to each other. And thank you so much for today.
Thank you, Ross. So moving forward, keep an eye out on the Chamber website. We're going to have a core team that will handle government updates, and we'll have a specialist panel members that can field questions based on what you suggest we should be covering. We want your help in identifying what those subjects are so we can make it even more relevant for you. Thank you very much for making the time to dial in. The very best of luck to all of us wealth creators, these small business entrepreneurs that keeping business going in these difficult times. So I take my hat off to you all. Very best of luck again. Same time, same place, next week, with your suggestions, please. And we look forward to seeing you. Have a good rest of the week. For those panelists, please stay on the line. I'll have a quick wrap up. But we look forward to seeing and speaking with you next week. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.